Her cries shattered the silence of dawn. Eliza Kane lay in the dirt, her dress torn to rags. Hands had dragged her. Fists had beaten her. Cruel laughter had broken what was left of her spirit. She was no longer a woman in their eyes. She was prey. Bruises blossomed like poison flowers on her neck and shoulders. Blood marked her cheek. Her wrists burned raw from ropes that had held her for days. Her body ached. Her soul begged for the peace of the grave. No mercy had been given. No hope remained. All night she had endured their abuse. They mocked her pleas. They silenced her screams. Every insult cut deeper than a whip. Every touch stripped away another piece of her will to live. When they finally fell into a drunken sleep, she crawled free. The prairie wind carried her sobs as she ran. Barefoot and shaking, she stumbled through thorn and dust. Each step tore her skin. Her lungs screamed for air, yet she did not stop. Behind her, she could already hear the stirring of the camp. The hunters would wake. They would chase. They would not forgive their property for escaping. At last, she reached the river. Snake Creek glittered under the rising sun, and its current promised an end to her pain. Her chest heaved. Her hands trembled. She whispered through broken lips, "It hurts so bad." She stepped into the water. Cold waves bit into her flesh. Her tears vanished in the current. The river pulled at her like a grave, and she let herself sink. Death seemed kinder than life. Her eyes closed. Her body drifted. Then came the thunder of hooves. A horseman rode hard along the ridge. Harlan Cole saw her pale figure beneath the water, a ghost in the morning light. A shock pierced his chest. Without a thought, he launched himself from his saddle. The river swallowed him whole. He fought the current, his boots dragging heavy in the mud. He reached her just as the last of her breath escaped. His arms wrapped around her limp frame. He dragged her upward. Her head broke the surface. She coughed. She gasped. Her body shook in his grip. Harlan pulled her to the bank. He wrapped his heavy ranch coat around her trembling shoulders. She clutched the fabric as though it were her last lifeline. Her eyes darted to every sound, raw terror on her face. Harlan knelt close, his voice steady. "You are safe now. This land still has law." But even as he said it, he saw the lie in his own words. He had seen the tracks leading from the riverbank, the tracks of 3 riders, and he recognized the brand on the horse that had been left behind. A cruel, jagged Sea Mason Crow's brand. Eliza coughed, her voice a cracked whisper. "They will never let me go." The rancher studied her bruised face. He saw the terror in her eyes. He saw a story that wasn't finished, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this nightmare had only just begun. Harlan half carried her into his small ranch house. He laid her on a worn quilt near the fire. He cleaned the cuts on her cheek and shoulder. She flinched, but her voice was stronger now. "They hurt me," she said, her eyes fixed on the flames. "They made me sign something. Said I was theirs." Harlan's jaw tightened. "What kind of paper?" She reached into the torn folds of her dress and pulled out a crumpled sheet. The ink was smeared with dirt and her own blood, but the name at the bottom was clear. Mason Crow. Harlan read it. A so-called marriage contract. The signatures were forged. The official stamps were fake. He had heard of such schemes, men selling young women like cattle under the false cover of the law. And now that darkness was here, in his home. Her tears fell onto the paper. "They will find me. They always do. Mason will never let me go." Harlan folded the contract and slipped it into his vest pocket. "Not while you are under my roof," he said, his voice hard as iron. The windmill creaked outside. The ranch felt calm, but Eliza's hands shook as if she heard something he did not. "You don't know this man," she whispered. "He owns guns. He owns men. He owns fear." Harlan stirred the fire, his mind turning. He had faced outlaws, droughts, and stampedes. But this was different. This was a young woman caught in a snare of pure evil. He poured her a cup of strong, bitter coffee. For the first time, she looked him directly in the eyes. "Why would you help me? You don't even know my name." A gust of wind rattled the shutters like a warning. "I know enough," he answered, his gaze steady. "I know Mason Crow." Her lips parted, a question forming. But before she could ask, the sound of a horse echoed beyond the fence line. The mug slipped in her hands, spilling coffee onto the quilt. Her face went pale with a familiar terror. Harlan rose and reached for the Winchester by the door. Someone was already coming for her, and he had a feeling he knew who it was. The sound of hooves grew louder. Harlan pushed the door open. A lone rider approached, sitting tall in the saddle, a black coat flapping in the breeze. His face carried a smile that wasn't meant to comfort. It was Mason Crow. He stopped at the gate and tipped his hat. "Morning, Cole. I hear you have something of mine." Harlan stood with the Winchester resting in his arm. "Only thing in this house is my fire and my word. Neither belongs to you." Crow smirked, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "This here says otherwise. The girl signed it. She's mine by law." "That paper is worth less than the dirt under your boots," Harlan said, his voice flat. "She is not property, not here." Crow's grin faded. He slid from his saddle. "You think your word can stand against mine? I have men. I have judges who drink from my glass. You are one man, Cole, standing in my way." Harlan's grip on the Winchester tightened. "I've seen men like you before, always shouting about what you own. But the law doesn't come from fear, not while I still breathe." Crow's hand twitched toward his holster. In a flash, Harlan stepped through the gate and locked his grip around Crow's wrist. The paper fluttered to the dirt. Crow cursed as Harlan twisted his arm, slamming him against the fence rail. The standoff lasted only a breath. Harlan released him with a shove. Crow straightened, rage burning in his eyes. "You'll regret this, Cole. Next time, I won't ride alone." He swung back onto his horse and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and a promise of violence hanging in the air. Inside, Eliza was frozen, clutching Harlan's coat. "He will come back," she whispered. "Then we make ready," Harlan said, his eyes hard. "Crow wants to talk about the law? Then we'll bring him the law." But as he looked out at the empty prairie, a darker thought took root. Crow wasn't just a bully. He was a predator, and predators don't give up their prey so easily. The next time he came, he wouldn't be coming to talk. He would be coming for blood. The dust from Crow's horse hadn't settled before Harlan made his decision. He couldn't wait for Crow to bring the fight here. He had to take it to him. "We ride to town," he told Eliza. "We see the sheriff." The ride to Red Bluff was tense. Eliza sat behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, her body rigid with fear. When they reached the small town, Harlan led her straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Brody was a heavy man with a tired face, a man who preferred peace to justice. He studied the fake contract, his expression unreadable. "This is Crow's signature, all right," Brody said, avoiding their eyes. "And I've got a witness who saw the girl sign it willingly." Harlan's blood ran cold. "That's a lie." "Maybe so," the sheriff sighed, pushing the paper back across his desk. "But it's his word against hers, a woman with no family, no standing. My hands are tied, Cole." It was a setup. The law in Red Bluff belonged to Mason Crow. As they stepped back into the dusty street, defeated, a man tipped his hat to them. It was one of Crow's men. He was watching them, reporting back. "He's trapped us," Eliza whispered, her voice laced with despair. "Not yet," Harlan said, his mind racing. "There's one more place we can go." He took her to the small church at the edge of town. Reverend Michael was an old man with eyes that saw more than most. He listened to Eliza's story, his face growing grim. "Mason Crow is a cancer on this land," the Reverend said, "but he is a powerful one. You cannot fight him with the law, Harlan. Not here." "Then how do we fight him?" "With the truth," Michael replied. He led them to the back of the church, to a dusty room filled with old records. "Eliza, you said the contract mentioned your family's old homestead?" She nodded. "Crow took it after my father died." "Your father was a good man, Thomas Kane," the Reverend said. "He filed a legal deed for that land. I was the witness. The records should be in the county seat." A flicker of hope. But the county seat was a 3-day ride, a ride Crow would never let them make. That night, they stayed in a small room above the general store. Harlan sat by the window, his Winchester across his lap, watching the street below. He knew Crow's men were out there, waiting. Just after midnight, he heard a creak on the stairs. He was on his feet in an instant, his rifle leveled at the door. The door swung open. It wasn't Crow's men. It was Sheriff Brody. "Get out of town, Cole," Brody whispered, his face slick with sweat. "Crow knows you're here. He's planning to burn this place to the ground tonight, with you and the girl inside." The sheriff, a coward, was finally showing a spine. He was giving them a chance. "He's got men watching the roads," Harlan said. "Not all of them," Brody replied. "The old canyon trail to the south. It's treacherous, but it's your only way out." There was no time to lose. Harlan woke Eliza. They slipped out the back and ran for the stables. As they saddled their horses, they could already smell the smoke. Shouts echoed from the other end of town. The fire had started. They rode hard, the glow of the burning town lighting their way. They reached the canyon trail just as the first of Crow's riders appeared behind them. The chase was on. Bullets whined off the canyon walls around them. They pushed their horses, scrambling over loose rock, the sound of their pursuers echoing in the narrow passage. They were trapped, outnumbered, and as they rounded a sharp bend, they rode straight into an ambush. Two of Crow's men stood waiting, rifles raised. They were caught in a crossfire. Harlan threw himself from his horse, pulling Eliza down with him, just as a volley of shots ripped through the air where they had been. He fired back, but he knew it was hopeless. This was the end of the line. Then from the cliffs above, another shot rang out, not at them, at Crow's men. One of the ambushers cried out and crumpled to the ground. Harlan stared up into the darkness, stunned. A figure stood on the ridge, silhouetted against the moon. The figure fired again, and another of Crow's men fell. The remaining riders, panicked, turned and fled back the way they came. The mysterious sharpshooter had saved their lives. As Harlan helped a shaken Eliza to her feet, he looked back up at the ridge. The figure was gone. "Who was that?" Eliza whispered. "I don't know," Harlan said, his mind reeling, "but I think we just found an ally." They rode on, not to the county seat, but deeper into the canyons, toward the only place Harlan knew they might find answers, his own past. He took Eliza to the ruins of an old homestead, a place of blackened timbers and faded ghosts. "This was my family's ranch," he told her, his voice low. "Crow burned it to the ground 15 years ago. He murdered my father." The story came pouring out. His father had discovered a rich vein of silver on their land. He had partnered with a younger, ambitious Mason Crow. But Crow betrayed him, killed him, and took the land and the silver for himself. The fire was blamed on a lightning strike. Harlan, just a boy, was the only survivor. "He built his empire on my father's blood," Harlan said, his hands clenched into fists. "And on your father's." Eliza stared at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "My father never trusted banks. He told me he kept his copy of the partnership agreement and the deed to our land, hidden somewhere safe." Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. Crow didn't just want Eliza silenced. He needed to find what her father had hidden. The contract was a lie to control her, to force her to lead him to the one thing that could destroy him. "We have to find it," Harlan said, a new fire in his eyes. "It's the only way to get justice for both our families." But as they stood among the ruins, another sound reached them, a single mournful whistle from the cliffs above, the signal of their mysterious protector. This time the figure didn't vanish. He came down to meet them. He was an old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes sharp and clear. It was Ben, his father's old ranch hand, a man Harlan had thought was dead for 15 years. "I saw the fire, son," Ben said, his voice rough. "I knew Crow was at it again." Ben told them he'd been living in the canyons ever since the first fire, watching Crow, waiting for a chance to see justice done. "Your father gave me something for safekeeping," Ben said, pulling a tarnished silver locket from his pocket. "He told me to give it to you when you were old enough to understand." Harlan opened the locket. Inside there was no picture. Instead, etched into the silver was a map of the canyons, with a single spot marked by a star. "The old Apache cave," Harlan breathed. "He used to take me there as a boy." "That's not all," Ben said, his eyes on Eliza. "Your father, Thomas Kane, he came to see me a month before he died. He knew Crow was coming for him. He left something with me, too." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a heavy oilskin-wrapped package. Eliza's hands trembled as she unwrapped it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, her father's journal. On the last page, he had written a letter to her. It detailed Crow's entire plan, the murder, the theft, and the location of the hidden documents. He'd buried them under the hearthstone of their own home. They had the proof. They had the map. But Crow was hunting them, and he was getting closer. They could hear the distant baying of his hounds. Time was running out. They rode like the wind, Ben leading them through secret paths Harlan had long forgotten. They reached the ruins of the Kane homestead just as the sun was setting. The hounds were closer now. They could hear men shouting. "You and Ben get the documents," Harlan told Eliza. "I'll hold them off." He took his position behind the burned-out shell of the barn, his Winchester ready. Eliza and Ben ran to the collapsed remains of the house and began digging frantically at the hearth. Crow and his men thundered into the clearing. The firefight was brutal. Harlan was outnumbered, but he was a better shot. He took down two of Crow's men before a bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him around. He staggered, trying to aim, but his vision was blurring. Crow stepped out from behind a wagon, a triumphant sneer on his face, his pistol leveled at Harlan's chest. "It's over, Cole," Crow snarled. "Just like your father." He was about to pull the trigger when a shot rang out, not from Harlan's rifle, but from the ruins of the house. Crow cried out, clutching his gun hand as his pistol clattered to the dirt. He stared in disbelief as Eliza stepped out of the shadows, her father's old rifle smoking in her hands. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, and she was done running. "This is for my father," she said, her voice clear and cold. Ben appeared beside her, holding up a metal box. "And this is for the law." The remaining men, their leader wounded and the proof of his crimes revealed, threw down their guns. Just then, a posse of riders appeared, led by a vindicated Sheriff Brody. Justice had finally come to Snake Creek. 3 months later, Harlan stood on the porch of his rebuilt ranch house, his arm around Eliza. The silver from his father's mine, now legally his, had paid for it all. The land was healing. They were healing. Eliza's father's journal had been the final nail in Crow's coffin. He and his men were sentenced to hang. The other young women he had victimized were finally free, their futures secured by a fund set up by Harlan and Eliza. Ben, the loyal ranch hand, now had a home for his old age, a small cabin just over the rise. The sun set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and rose. Eliza leaned her head on Harlan's shoulder. "It's over," she whispered. "No," he said, pulling her closer. "It's just beginning." They had faced the darkness together and won. They had found justice for their families and, in the process, found a love forged in fire and truth. What do you think is stronger, the law written on paper or the justice a person carries in their heart? Let us know in the comments below. If this story of courage and redemption on the frontier captured your spirit, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next tale of how the biggest fights are often for the things you can't see.